Do you think that's enough for you to get invested? That's never enough. Never, right? So nobody will invest in you in a number. So think about how you stand out uniquely in a way that's like, maybe you have some unique team story, completely unique team story. Maybe you found a pain point that only you really, really, really understand how to solve, and you have 20 years behind it. Or maybe, something like that. So figure out what's absolutely unique about you, about your company, other than just numbers.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Next Big Thing HQ. We have an amazing guest with us today. Let me give you his resume first before I spoil the surprise. So his background's in software engineering. He worked at Google, Facebook, WeWork, and started working in the AI ML area before it was cool. Then he became an angel investor, has a very successful track record, invested in several unicorns, including PandaDoc, People.ai, Instacart, which I know you got to be happy about with the IPO, and Airbyte. Recently, 2021, he started his own venture capital firm, and they set out with the goal for their first fund to raise $15 million. They just closed their first fund, raising $23 million. So congratulations and welcome onto the show, Ihar Mahaniok.
Thank you very much, Connor. I'm really glad to be here and really honored. And thank you for that great introduction. Yeah, you hit all the right points.
Yeah, well, you've been able to pick winners very, very well, and I'm going to want to dive into that later because not many angel investors can pick a unicorn, let alone multiple unicorns. So we'll get to that later. But first, let's start off with Geek Venture. So what'd you set out to accomplish with Geek Ventures?
So with Geek Ventures, I wanted to build a VC firm that can really, move the needle and can really have a positive impact on the world. The question was how exactly to do it, or from which angle, because it's not only about what I want to achieve, but also where the best I can apply my skills, my knowledge, my resources. So I ended up choosing the space of helping immigrant founders building in the US, because that is exactly the journey I went through, right? So I came to the US 10 years ago and built my own network connections, adapted to the culture. Really glad to be here and really be part of this, the most advanced and forward-looking economy in the world. So at Geek Ventures, we are focusing on driving the equal opportunity for immigrant entrepreneurs. And we specifically know that this is an issue of that immigrant entrepreneurs often don't have equal opportunity because they are under-connected, under-networked. And we are introducing connections and, of course, support them with capital.
So you have a quote that I love that says, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So with Geek Ventures, you're using the value you bring to the table is having a network so that when you connect, you can connect immigrant founders to other sources of either capital or other founders or other companies that can help that startup continue to grow and get to the next level. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So I guess the process is kind of, how do you help overcome that networking challenge? Do you have to play an active role of constantly reaching out and constantly helping them connect? Or is it more of setting them up to be in the right place at the right time to create their own network?
So there are many tools that I and my team maybe utilize there, right? First of all, the most important is the coaching and mentoring, and basically making sure they understand the basics and do's and don'ts, and they have an understanding of where to go and how to reach out. What are the practices that work and don't work? Another thing that a lot of first-time founders need this support as well in general, and we work a lot with first-time founders. The second big tool is actually direct warm introductions, where I focus a lot on that every time after we invest, we introduce the company to other investors, other VCs, and in some cases up to 50 introductions can go out, depending on the fit of this company to those VCs. And the third is getting them to the right place, exactly what you mentioned. And that's where our events are an important part of process and value add for the firm, right? So we host regular events. Every 3 months, we host them in New York. We host them in Q4. We host them in so many cities. We host an event in Boston, in San Francisco, in Warsaw, in Lisbon, in New York. Like all of these events, there's events that help where we invite both founders that we invest in and the founders in our orbit, founders we are looking at, founders we want to help. And on the other hand, we invite more experienced founders. We invite VCs. And all of that fosters this community and this environment where the founders who don't have a network can connect and meet the people that can help them or potentially invest in them.
So you talked about the first point was the do's and don'ts first-time founders don't really know about. So can you elaborate more on that an experienced founder would know, but a first-time founder may not know?
So one of the most important obvious things for a second-time founder is that warm intros to investors are really, really critical and are 100 times better than cold reach outs on one hand. On the other hand, building a funnel and reaching out to a lot of investors is very, very important. So I think the mistake that I see a lot of first-time founders who are new to fundraising do, that they don't try to utilize the warm intro paths. And there were a couple times in my time and even in the last year or two when the founder reached out cold to me and their message was lost in in hundreds of messages that would reach out and what didn't stand out. And then several months later, another person who knows that founder would introduce me would make a warm intro to that founder. Like, okay, finally, right? So that founder is like really top of mind. And here's the thing, right? So what I do is that I think I tell them that it's super important that try to get most of your introductions warm introductions and only get to cold when you're out of warm intro paths, right? So, but focus a lot on warm introductions. Really make sure that people who introduce you warm can speak well and endorse you, right? And help people to do warm intros for you, right? So, for example, don't just say, Ihar, can you introduce me to somebody? Tell me, Ihar, I see that you know Connor, and Connor would be helpful to me. Could you say a few words about me to Connor, right? So things like this are, so learning how to do warm introductions is an extremely crucial skill. Then doing the CRM for VC outreach and also doing cold reach outs to those VCs to whom you don't have warm intro path is also important, and learning how to do cold reach out in a way that is positive, that it has high response rate. So these are like very one area, right? So I can keep going about do's and don'ts, right? But these are a few things.
Well, that makes sense. That kind of reminds me of LinkedIn. When people reach out to me on LinkedIn and there's no mutual connection between that person and me, I immediately kind of disregard it. It gets lost in the trash. But when I see there's a mutual connection, it's kind of that credibility, right? Where it's, oh, they know so-and-so, I like so-and-so, so let me at least give them the time of day or at least acknowledge their message. And I didn't think, that also plays a very similar effect in VC because the other VCs. So if they know one VC and has that VC either vouch for them or just say, hey, reach out and this person could be very helpful for you, that kind of helps give them more credibility.
And especially important that I think the big issue when the founder already has some investors, even if it's an angel or especially if it's a small VC, make sure you utilize this in the best way possible because the person who already put their money to support you is the best warm endorsement that could ever be, right? Maybe your ex-classmate could also tell that you are brilliant, but somebody says, I put $20,000 or $50,000 to support a startup. That's even stronger endorsement. So whenever anybody invests in you, try to make sure that they introduce you to as many people as possible.
That makes sense. They got skin in the game, right? So if they're going to introduce you, there's a lot of credibility. But then I guess if we take that from the founder's perspective, what do you think is more important? The founder being able to network and have really strong connections or being able to raise capital?
So I think both of those are important, right? Because these are very connected. So typically people who raise capital are people who have strong connections, right? So that's
Right.
it's definitely one leads to another, right? So it's like you cannot raise capital without connections. So what the only way I can see this as a dichotomy is, do you want to take 2 million from one investor or build connections with like 10, 20 investors and take 2 million from multiple investors, right? And in that particular case, I would always advocate for taking money in smaller checks from more investors.
Why is that?
In the end, the strength of your network is not just, whether you have somebody with a big check, one person or like few persons there, but how many people who are successful, who have some clout, have skin in the game, that know you, that can endorse you. And always try to keep increasing that, because the second level connection, third level connection, this grows exponentially, and if you are focused on building on nurturing 5 or 10 connections, your whole network, including second, third level, will be significantly like 100 times smaller than if you nurture 20, 30 connections.
That makes sense. And it's almost like a concentration risk, right?
Yeah.
You have just few investors, but you've been able to pick you've been an investor in a lot of really successful startups. So what do you look for in founders? We'll talk about founders first. What do you look for in the founder when you're going to invest in the startup?
So one of the super important things that I look in the founder is how passionate and knowledgeable and experienced they are about the sector and the problem they are solving, right? So it's in the area that I call founder market fit, right? So, and I think the most risky startups is where the founder tries to solve a problem with which they don't have intimate knowledge or relationship since many years, right? So the best performing founders are those that are going for the problems in the markets that they have been really familiar with, that they understand what they're doing. And the tough is for founders that go into difficult markets in which they don't know what are the problems there. So that's one big thing. Another thing is that the founder is able to do sales in wider sense, in sense that can they speak very convincingly? Can they convince investors, teammates, potential co-founders, customers about their vision? Can they make vision sound both succinct and clear, but at the same time really big and significant, right? So
Right.
that's I think some of the more kind of difficult cases for me to invest are the founders that are able to build a business and have traction, but that get lost in trying to explain the grand vision. If they cannot really explain the big vision behind the business, it's not really a venture backable thing, right? It could be a good business, but it's difficult
Not
to build
VC.
it into something that VCs would be supporting.
Okay.
So these are a few things. And as a function of that, right? So are they able to hire, right? So, and I think that, of course, when the team is super small, it's often difficult to measure that. But what I like a lot is looking at teams of 3, 5, 6 people and see if these people are outstanding. And if I see that probably the people are more like on the average side, that's a problem, right? If I see outstanding people, that's great. So that's definitely.
Does that kind of go along with the saying, A players hire A players, C players hire C players? So if it's a team of C players, then the founder more or less is definitely not an A player. He might be a B player, but he can't get that A player talent to come on his team to work with him.
Yeah. So basically, if you see at least one C player on the team, then you can guess that somebody who hired him is probably not an A player. I agree.
That makes sense. And then you talked about founders have to be passionate in the market. This, makes me a little bit curious. Seeing all these startups, they're all talking about AI. They want to use AI and implement AI. But how many founders actually know and understand AI? Because you're an expert in kind of AI and machine learning. You've been doing it for a really long time. So I'm sure you see this a lot where a founder says they want to use AI to solve this problem, but I don't think they really understand how AI is going to be used in the full implication and the execution that's going to have to take place in order to accomplish their mission.
I agree that this is an issue, especially this year when AI became on everybody's forefront. And you remember a couple of years ago, a lot of startups tried to implement blockchain for no good reason, just because everybody was talking about blockchain. But here's the thing, that I think with AI, one thing is different, that AI becomes such an important tool that it will be difficult at some point to build a startup without AI. And in the same way that you cannot build a startup without cloud pretty much anymore. People built startups without clouds 15 years ago, but now you probably are using some cloud. And I think what we will get to in several years is that startups will again stop talking about using AI, but they will be using AI internally because it just makes so much sense technically to basically reduce your engineering costs or other costs because they will utilize AI. But at the same time, people will stop talking about it because using AI, it will not be a necessary advantage because everybody will be using it.
Yes.
This year is a little bit unusual that using AI sounds like, oh, you are a visionary and but it's going away. I feel that because it's so obvious that every startup founder that's worth anything is using AI in this shape or that. The question then, though, is that some startups are specifically focused on, for them, AI is absolutely critical, right? And there are some startups that wouldn't be possible last year or 2 years ago before AI was developed, right? And that's an important difference. But at the same time, every year or 2 years, there is some another reason why new startups are coming up. And that's another question that I ask when potentially evaluating an investment. Why now? Meaning that this startup, why should we invest this year in a startup like this? Why the startup like this wasn't possible or wasn't feasible or wasn't needed 3 years ago?
Right.
And why would it be successful now versus let's wait 2-3 years because it's too early, right? So, and AI made another wave of why now startups that are only possible this year and were not possible before. But at the same time, next year and a couple of years from now, there'll be more, things made possible by technology, and there'll be the next thing. One thing that I want to mention is that really good VCs that are building firms that are long-term, like 10-year, 20-year, 30-year firms, they know that building a business, selling a product, and being an entrepreneur is essentially the same, and everything else is a tool, right? So firms like Sequoia or others that have been existing for a while, they were able to, back startups before AI was a thing, before cloud was a thing, right? And they should be able to back entrepreneurs later. We are only out there for 2 years, right? And we have already seen several significant changes in that time, right? So NFT were a thing, and now they're not really a thing, right? So LLMs, nobody knew what it is. Now it's all the talk of it, right? But one thing that we focus a lot is, and this is the timeless completely. One is we invest in startups where founders really care about solving customers' problems, right? So there is problem, there is a pain point. The customer cannot solve this problem or pain point using competing solutions, and is happy to pay for somebody to solve it. And this founder knows how to build a solution using technology. This is important, right? Do they use AI? Do they use NFT? It doesn't really matter, right? So what matters is that the solution is built. That's one. And second angle that's really important, that we like to back founders that are on forefront of technology, in sense that they are not building legacy, outdated solutions, that their solutions utilizing that they're smart and knowledgeable to utilize the most recent technology, and they will not get outraced by somebody more closer to the forefront of technology, right? So to summarize, as long as the founder knows how to use the newest technology, and they really focused, first of all, on the customer's problems, that's great. And that's what we focus on right now and 10 years from now.
So you mentioned the why now question. And I kind of want to connect that with you investing in Instacart. You invested in Instacart very, very early.
Yes.
So you asked that question, why now?
Yes.
What was the answer to that question before you invested or made you want to invest in Instacart?
Great question. So I think the most important that we have all seen at that time, the success of the very early gig economy model. I think the word gig economy wasn't even there, but Uber was a thing already. So I invested in Instacart 2012, right? So Uber was there since a couple years before that, and they were only doing black cars, like really high touch, but at the same time, it was proper gig economy. And at the same time, there was demand was always, not always, and it was proven even earlier, for grocery delivery, right? People wanted groceries. People needed to find way to save time on grocery shopping. People in the US were moving to have fewer cars, so there was less about this like giant driving trips to the grocery stores. And the most important thing that changed in 2011, 2012 is the understanding and acceptance of the gig economy concept. So Instacart was the first one that took the demand that existed for a while, took the supply that started to be visible thanks to other very first gig economy companies like Uber, and they're like, okay, now. At the point there about that, it was very difficult to do before. Cell phones were not there.
Yep.
Especially on the supply side, people who would work as gig economy workers. Internet was not there. It was difficult. But then they couldn't delay because if Instacart started, because just several years later it became so obvious and so ubiquitous that other companies would just fill the void, and Instacart's first mover advantage ended up being really, really helpful.
How important is that first mover advantage when you look at startups? I know that's a pretty broad question, but I hear a lot of VCs talking, we want you to be we have the first mover advantage. And like, if you look at Google with search, right? Google wasn't the first company to do search or the search engine, and they kind of came out, I think, after Yahoo. So I guess from your perspective, how important is a startup to have first mover advantage?
So what is first mover, or which company is first mover, is actually very subjective. Because if you go back to Google, where I know it's very intimately because I worked there, and I had my code in the Google search engine as well. So, but the thing there, that before Google, there was no really good search engine that focuses on reputation that's automatically calculated. Yahoo was more a catalog, right? And here's the thing, that Google was the first search engine of this kind, and then there was Bing, So what do you think? Is like Bing is not really worse than Google, but it lost because of the first mover advantage.
Okay.
Right? So there were a lot of clones of Facebook, and at the same time, you can say that Facebook... My point is that it's often that not the first company that came up with this, what is the problem, but the first company that came up with the right solution ends up winning it, right?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, yes.
But it's also about building a moat, because when you are building when you know the problem, when you know the solution, but you're not able to build the moat around your solution, then being first mover means nothing, right? So you end up losing your customers. I think even this year, there was this company, Jasper, that raised a lot of money for copyright and AI, and they were first mover in many ways in 2022, but it was very difficult for them to build a moat, right? And this year, people moved on to using other copyrighted solutions. So this is another example of difficult, but there are more examples where it's important to not just build the right solution, but also build a moat where you know that people have so much benefit, they get invested, your customers cannot do not want to leave to a new one.
The cost of change for the customer is so high that they're never going to think about switching products.
Not only cost, but like it's also benefit is like keeps increasing, right, as they stay inside, right? So we are not thinking. So I don't advise my startup founders to increase the switching costs. What I advise them that make sure that your customers every day they build up the value internally in your product, right? So then by the time they think about the switching, they're like, oh, but I will lose the value, and the value keeps increasing, and then the value will be completely new. It's like, I have my mailbox on Gmail, right? And switching to another mailbox means that I will lose access, or it will not be that easy directly to use the same email search, right? So it's like, okay. It's not that I cannot switch, it's that I will lose the benefit, right? Or AI, by the way, is a great enablement of modes here, because the smart AI solutions can build models that are so fine-tuned to your need that in order to, when you switch to a new solution, you will have a model that's much more bland and much less customized, and you're like, you will prefer to go back to your previous vendor.
You think that's kind of like what TikTok did, where the algorithm is so catered to the individual, it's hard for an individual to leave TikTok or to not use TikTok because they know the algorithm's going to give them what they want to see, and it's catered to them, and the process of, I don't know, doing like Instagram Reels or even going on another social media platform, it's not going to be the same, right? They're not going to get as much value.
It's a very interesting case because it's not about like, even the thinking process, like, oh, I'm on TikTok, then maybe I shouldn't try Instagram. People go try it. It's just that when they try, they probably don't get as much value. But it's more difficult to think about TikTok because TikTok actually works fairly well for people who are not even signed in, right? And I believe that TikTok mode is not just the personalized algorithm, but it's a lot about content and being able to tap into generalized algorithms. So
that makes sense. And like curating the content that's most engaging.
Yeah.
Now, let's switch it to you starting and founding your venture capital firm, Geek Ventures. Talk to me. What was that process like? What was the inflection point that made you say, I'm going to start my own firm? And then how'd you start getting deal flow?
Great question. So first of all, as active angel investor, right? So I have been invested as an angel since it was like 12 years ago, right? So, and my deal flow has been building up since then. And then the question there was, can I, come up with an idea that really drives me for the next 10 years? And then I realized during that process that I really, really prefer everything related to investments. Talking to founders, helping founders, advising founders, selecting, and so on. And that was like really my aha moment that I found something that I both enjoy, apparently I can do well, and that others willing to support. And that the third angle was also important, that there were a couple people that co-invested with me for a while as angels who told me that they would want to just invest money in a way that I would manage their money, and that I would invest their money instead of them thinking about every deal and separately invest in every deal. That was one aha moment. Okay, maybe I should try to take and invest other people's money as opposed to just mine as an angel. And second, that I found out about this free accelerator for venture firms called VC Lab, and I decided to join it. And I found out that actually building a venture firm is, while it's really difficult to find out how to do it because there's very little information about it online or in the books, it's actually not as hard as I thought, right? As long as you know how to invest, right? As long as you have the track record, building a firm around it is actually fairly doable. So VC Lab helped me to operationalize it. And then I went and came up with my mission, my name, idea, and I went and raised the money for the fund.
So what was that process like, raising money? Because you set the expectation for the first fund, $15 million. and it finished with 23 million, which is awesome.
Yeah.
It seems like most VCs, they set the bar high and then they don't quite get it, but they close the fund and they deploy the capital. But you beat the expectation by what, 40%? So what was that process like, raising capital, talking to the LPs, and what was their feedback and response to your mission and what you're trying to solve with your fund?
So the response was really, really good. And I think overall, I talked about 500 potential LPs, and I ended up getting investment from 70 of them. So what I found very early on is that my focus on immigrants really struck a chord. So it was new, right? It felt for many LPs, especially individuals, that that looked at the investment in VC as more, impact, mission, something that is more like that engages them emotionally as opposed to those very numbers-oriented institutional LPs, right? For them, it was way more interesting to invest in a fund that supports immigrant entrepreneurs as opposed to invest in a fund that supports just, specific business model like B2B SaaS or something. So I found that investing in immigrant founders really, really was a good way to win LPs' hearts. And then another thing what is important is the solid track record over 10 years was another thing that helped to really bring home why this should work, right? So why basically this together with with a lot of hustle of actually going through, and this is my advice to other potential VCs, is go and talk to a lot of people, right, to potentially invest. So but I think that there was a case of me talking to another VC that started raising their fund but didn't finish yet. Was that VC talked to like 30 people, and then they're like, "What should I do next?" And I'm like, hey, "Keep talking to more people, right?" So it's like it's definitely not enough, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's also like that from the VC side when it comes to investing in startups, right? From what I'm hearing is a lot of startups, you want to, I don't know, see like 300 startups a month, maybe not that much, but you want to see as many startups as possible. And then you might only invest in a handful of startups, but just, it's kind of getting that quantity, because when you get so much quantity, then you're going to get quality out of it. And that seems like a common theme that comes up a lot when I'm talking to VCs. Can you talk about a common misconception I might have or another outsider might have about VCs that simply isn't true?
So that actually was a very correct observation, that we typically aim for 1% investment rate. So we look at 200 startups, invest in 2, right? So about every month. Yeah. And the better VCs have the graduation rate of that kind, right? So, and I think that for any LPs out there, that's one thing that to measure your VC on is like how much numbers wise deal flow they actually get, because you can, if you're because there are several angles there. One is, are you able to get access to a lot of opportunities? And second is, are you able to select really, really well from them? And the point is that, of course, to be absolutely excellent, best of the best VC, you need to be perfect in both first and second aspects. But the thing is that if you are really, really good in just one of them, you're already ahead of the crowd.
Okay.
So that's one thing. And another thing that is important is that I think the big misconception that a lot of outsiders have is that it's always very simple, straightforward, yes or no answer. In absolute, maybe in many cases, maybe not in majority, but in very many cases, the answer from a VC is maybe not now, but later, right? So, and the good thing for a startup is to keep in touch with the VCs that didn't invest yet, but didn't tell them that, no, you will never fit my thesis, right? So, because of course, if the startup doesn't fit our thesis geographically or some other ways, then it doesn't make sense for them to continue engaging with us. But we had situations when a startup that we didn't invest a year ago or 2 years ago, we ended up investing at a later point, right? So one important thing is that for startup founders to keep getting yourself on the radar of the same investor that decided not to invest in you earlier.
Is that maybe not now, but later, usually dependent more on you want to see a little bit more traction. You want them to have a little bit better metrics, key metrics that you think are in certain industries, and they're close but not quite there. So you're just waiting for them to improve a little bit or show a little bit more growth before you bet. What are your bet sizes? Usually like 50 to 200K?
Correct. It's 50 to 200K. But there are so many angles how the startup can change or improve. First of all, their market might change, right? So the startup might pivot enough to go for a bigger market, wider market. Their team might change. Maybe one of the co-founders left, you got another co-founder, or you hired somebody C-level that is really, really important and significant for the company. So even this kind of changes. Maybe your product, maybe your positioning changed, that you are solving a new pain point. Maybe your solution changed, right? Significantly.
Right.
So all of this can change significantly. For example, if you had a market issue with the startup, they come back to the new market. That's great. If you were not sure that they're solving the pain point that really exists, and they find out a different pain point, things can change. But of course, traction is also very helpful, right? So, and sometimes what happens is that there is a right market, but we are not sure that this team found the right pain point. We don't have a proof. We are not confident, right? So we can say, okay, come back to us when you prove this pain point. And then they come back 6 months later, and they suddenly have the metrics growing through the roof. Like, wow, this means you found the right pain point, right? So
that makes a lot of sense. And, with startups too, it's always iterate. It's never like you're immediately going to find it, right? It comes from the iteration. So it makes sense why you're not immediately going to decide whether you're going to invest or not in a startup. And you also don't want to burn any bridges and say, no, I'm absolutely never going to invest in you, because if the startup does find the right pain point, then it can really grow. Since you've invested in quite a few unicorns, is there any similarities between, let's say, PandaDoc, People.ai, Instacart, Airbyte that you've seen where you have a good intuition that startup's going to be pretty successful?
I think that it's my general approach is that every decision is extremely custom, right? So one thing that unifies all of them is that the founder is impressive in some way, but other than that, it's all very custom. Of course, everywhere founder is impressive, market is large, and they all have a way to prove to me that they understand their customers very early on. But other than that, it's all very different, right? So Instacart was going for a very difficult problem with where there was a big execution risk, but they already shown by the time I invested the execution in some neighborhoods of San Francisco. While People.ai had no product when I invested, but they had a guy at the head of the firm that was obviously one of the best salespeople I've seen, and he was building a product for salespeople. So he had amazing founder market fit, no product, some risk whether he will develop it, but no risk whether he will sell it, right? So while PandaDoc already had customers that were happy, so that had initial traction, and was also at a point where it was a very clear value add for me. So while, Airbyte was more like a bunch of extremely smart people that go for a really clear area that's just opening up now, like all these data tools, and they will definitely figure it out. So in the end, it's I think that every convenient solution is different, and even in the Geek Ventures portfolio right now, we have close to 40 companies. Every single company we invested in, I have really clear reasons why I invested in them, but they are not all the same. So,
okay, it's not like one size fits all.
Not at all. And here's the thing, that this is also a hint or a tip to startup founders. Figure out how you stand out, right? And especially early stage. Because in the end, when you hear everywhere, oh, traction is king and it's important what your traction is, in the end, you are not getting invested just because of the number, right? So, you have 100K ARR or 500K ARR. Do you think that's enough for you to get investment? That's never enough. Never, right? So nobody will invest in you in the number. So think about how you stand out uniquely in a way that's like, maybe you have some unique team story, completely unique team story. Maybe you found a pain point that only you really, really, really understand how to solve, and you have 20 years behind it. Or maybe, something like that. So figure out what's absolutely unique about you, about your company, other than just numbers.
Yep, that makes sense. And I did want to talk about, you had this post on LinkedIn that got a lot of impressions, got a lot of reactions. I really like it. I just wanted to give you the floor to talk about it, but it was you talking about what you think is a red flag in founders, and it is basically saying no to applying to YC is a red flag, especially when they say, I don't think it's worth it. And you said that there's four types of founders: those who went through YC, those who didn't get accepted, those who raised $20 million themselves, and non-VC companies. So can you please elaborate a little bit more on it?
Great topic. So here's the interesting thing, that I actually spoke yesterday to a founder who has a company that already raised something like $10 million at something like close to 100 million valuation. And he has, I think, 50 people team. And he applied to Y Combinator again, right now. And he said that he's ready to give up 7% of equity to go through YC, even though his company is worth way more than typical YC company.
Right.
And I'm asking why, because in the end, it's the same answer as all people who benefit from YC, is that YC gives you a completely different network and visibility and support than anywhere else, right? So I'm not affiliated with YC in any way, but I think that not applying to YC to me shows that founders are either greedy because they don't want to even consider parting with 7% of equity, or they are not humble enough because they think that they know everything and they have enough connections and YC will not help them, or they just didn't do their homework and they don't understand the value of YC, or they don't think in terms of optionality. Because another important angle that I tried to drive into that post, that applying to YC costs nothing apart your time. Before you get accepted and you take an offer, you don't need to give up equity. To apply, you don't need to give up equity. To apply, you need to give up 1 hour of your time to fill the form, right? And the point is that especially for early stage startups, it's such a obvious trade-off, because you give up 1 hour of your time to fill the form. During filling the form, you improve your positioning because the form is really good. You basically, improve how you can talk about your startup. Then you can tell everybody starting next day that you applied to YC. And then for a month or two, you have a better fundraising positioning with early stage VCs, because you will now have a potential to be a YC company. That's great to close couple, half a million on saves or something. While then you will go, maybe you will get accepted to get interviews. Again, that's just a couple hours of your time. That's the cost. That's it. There is no equity cost to go through interviews. These interviews will be really peppered with really interesting questions that will help you understand how VCs go, how VCs accept you. And then you might get an offer. By the way, chances of you getting an offer are fairly low, but it's even worth it even if you don't get an offer. But if you get an offer, now you have two situations or two options, both great. One option, you can decline an offer and then tell everybody that you were accepted to YC and decided not to take it. But you were good enough to be accepted to YC. It's almost like I was accepted to Harvard, but decided not to.
But I said no, right?
Yeah, it's it costs nothing. It costs nothing to decline YC offer. There's no equity cost. The only cost of time. And now you have got yourself a badge of company good enough for YC. That's great. That's great to raise pre-seed and seed. Or even better, that I would suggest, is accept an offer from YC, lose 7%, and then suddenly you get elevated, or you get into this very small club of companies that, first of all, it's amazing network. Like every YC company is connected to every YC company, and they can sell to each other. They can help each other. It's a completely different network. It's better than like, Harvard alums, Stanford alums, or anything like that. And second, you will get completely on the radar of all VCs, like tier 1, tier 2, all of them, right?
Yes.
The company and we're going back to what we discussed in the very beginning of this call, that connections are everything. By giving 7% to YC, you'll get the best connections ever, right?
Yes.
You don't need me or anybody else to introduce you to Sequoia or General Catalyst or anybody else. They will come and want to talk to you yourself, right? And maybe they will invest exploration check. Like General Catalyst, I think, invests in like 30 or 40 companies, each batch a small check, and they will start. Having a fund like this with a small check on your cap table will elevate. It's just like so obviously great from connections, and the only cost is 7%. That the thing is
win-win.
Yeah, it's like, yes, and especially it's what is important for me is like why I put this maybe not VC compatible, because the founders that are VC compatible, the founders that want to raise VCs, they don't think in terms how big their own piece of the pie is. They think in how big the pie is.
Yeah.
And yes, by giving 7% to YC, you lose, you lower your own share of the pie, but your pie gets 10 times bigger.
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I was looking at all the comments and I started laughing just because it's a win-win for you to go to YC. If you get accepted, you get the networks. You talk about connections and how important connections are and the network is earlier. And also, too, this week was New York Tech Week. The smartest guy I talked to, he graduated from the YC, I think, summer 19. And the way he could just articulate everything and articulate the consumer's problems and how nuanced he was, and he understood the mission. Like, you could tell that's from just going to YC and understanding kind of this is what the bar is, right? It raises the expectation, it raises the bar because you're in a class with everyone else that's trying to get to that next level.
Yeah. And this is actually why I like investing in ex-YC founders. So, because YC doesn't guarantee that your startup will not fail, but it is just such a great education. And now, I see ex-YC founders in my pipeline with their new startup. And now it maybe even they shouldn't even go through the YC again with the new startup because they already have the connections, but they also have the lessons, they have the skills, right? So, and now they're way better prospects for me, right? So,
yep. And you don't have to teach them, right? They already know that stuff. They already learned that stuff. But I know.
I don't think I can teach them, right? So there is a lot of things that I can teach them, but YC has amazing partners that can teach other things that I can do, right? So,
well, Ihar, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. This has been an amazing conversation. Real quick before you go, where can founders reach out to you, connect with you, if they have a startup?
So first of all, reach out to me on LinkedIn. My DMs are open. So. Or comment or, add me. Second, you can go on our website and fill a form of pitch us, and we will reach out to your startup. But more interestingly, if you want to pitch your startup to us, the best is to try to find a warm intro endorsement. Maybe one of your current investors knows me and can, or somebody in our firm, and can share about your startup. But feel free to go to keep. I think another important thing is that being engaging, right? So they go in comments, write thoughtful stuff, and that will be something that will get you noticed.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to come on this podcast. This has been an amazing episode, and I'm really excited to see how this first fund goes, and I'm excited to see many more funds in the future for Geek Ventures. So.
Thank you, Connor, and maybe talk to you and your listeners later.
Yeah. That sounds good. Have a nice day. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening. And we'll see you next time on Next Big Thing HQ. Bye-bye.
Bye.